Ellie Marsh heard the doors slam shut behind her, before she even understood why she was standing in the center of the great hall. Every eye in the room was on her. The fire in the tall stone hearth cracked and spat sparks into the air, but nobody moved to tend it. Nobody blinked. The entire pack council sat above her on a raised platform, their faces unreadable, waiting. "You stand accused of treason," said Councilman Renwick Hale, his voice slicing through the silence like a blade through cloth. "The war plans of this pack were found in enemy hands 3 nights ago. Someone inside these walls gave them away. We have reason to believe that someone was your brother." Ellie's heart slammed against her ribs. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her head on the walk over, and yet now that it was here, her mouth went dry. She looked past Renwick, past the rows of stone-faced councilmen, until her eyes found her brother. Noah Marsh stood near the side wall, flanked by 2 guards, his wrists bound in silver chain that dimmed his strength. He was only 22. He had been given his post in the war room a mere 2 months ago, the first real honor of his short life. The first time anyone in this pack had looked at him and seen more than the orphaned boy who used to sleep behind the training barn. He did not do this. Ellie knew it in the marrow of her bones. But knowing it and proving it were 2 very different things. And right now, with the entire council staring holes into her chest, she did not have proof. All she had was time. And time was the one thing Noah did not have. "It wasn't him," Ellie said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "It was me." A murmur rippled through the hall. Renwick's eyebrows lifted, though something flickered behind his eyes that looked almost like satisfaction rather than surprise. "Explain yourself," he said. "I took the documents," Ellie said. "I went into the war room 3 nights ago, after the guards changed shift. I copied the plans onto parchment, and I passed them to a contact outside the pack borders. My brother had nothing to do with it. He wasn't even on duty that night. It was a lie, built on sand, and she knew it. She had no idea what shift Noah had been working, no idea what the guard's schedule even looked like, but she said the words with her chin lifted and her shoulders square, because if she flinched even once, they would see through her in an instant, and everything would be for nothing. From his chair at the highest point of the platform, the Alpha King said nothing. Draven Ashford had not spoken since Ellie entered the hall. He sat with one elbow resting on the carved arm of his chair, his knuckles pressed lightly against his jaw, his gaze fixed on Ellie, with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was the youngest Alpha King the pack had crowned in 3 generations, and already the wolves under his rule spoke of him in careful, measured tones, the way people speak about weather that might turn violent without warning. "Take her to the holding chamber," Renwick said, rising from his seat. "We will proceed with the trial in 2 days' time." "Wait," Draven said. It was the first word he had spoken, and the entire hall seemed to hold its breath at the sound of it. Renwick paused, half risen from his chair, his mouth still open, as though the interruption had physically startled him. "My king?" Renwick said carefully. "I said wait." Draven stood. He was tall, taller than most men in the hall, and when he moved down the steps of the platform, the crowd parted without needing to be told. He crossed the stone floor until he stood only a few feet from Ellie, close enough that she could see the faint gold flecks in his otherwise dark eyes, close enough that she had to fight the instinct to step back. "Say it again," he told her. "Tell me exactly what you did, in order, from the moment you entered the war room." Ellie's mind raced. She had not prepared for this. She had prepared a confession, not an interrogation. "I entered through the east corridor," she said, choosing the vaguest possible details. "After the shift change, I found the ledger on the table, and I copied the pages I needed." "Which pages?" Draven said. "The ones with the troop positions." "There are no troop positions recorded on paper in that room," Draven said quietly. "They are memorized by 4 people, myself included, and never written down. So tell me again, Ellie Marsh, what exactly did you steal?" The hall went utterly silent. Ellie felt the blood drain from her face, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "The border maps," she said. "I meant the border maps. You said troop positions a moment ago." "I misspoke." Draven studied her for a long moment, and Ellie had the uncomfortable sensation that he was not looking at her face so much as through it, searching for something buried underneath. Whatever he found there, he did not share it with the room. "Take her to the holding chamber," he said finally, echoing Renwick's earlier command. though his tone carried none of the councilman's eagerness. But release the brother. He is not to be touched, questioned, or restrained further, until I say otherwise. My king, surely both should be held until the trial, Renwick said, and there was an edge in his voice now, something sharper than simple procedure. Both were not accused with equal evidence, Draven said. One confessed. The other was merely suspected. Release him. The guards flanking Noah exchanged an uncertain glance before finally unlocking the silver chain from his wrists. Noah rubbed at the raw skin beneath the cuffs, his eyes wide and frightened, fixed entirely on his sister. Ellie, no, he said, taking a step toward her. This isn't right. You didn't do anything. Tell them the truth. Take him outside, Draven said to the guards, and though his voice was calm, there was an authority in it that could not be argued with. The guards moved to escort Noah from the hall, and he fought against them for only a moment, before his sister's eyes stopped him cold. Let them take you home, Ellie said. Please, Noah, let me handle this. His face crumpled, but he allowed himself to be led away, casting one last helpless look over his shoulder, before the great doors swallowed him from view. Ellie was left standing alone in the center of the hall, surrounded by councilmen who had already, in their minds, condemned her. Only the Alpha King remained close, still studying her with that same unreadable expression. 2 days, he said quietly, so only she could hear. You have 2 days before the trial begins. I suggest you use them wisely, because right now, your story would not survive a single honest question, let alone a full council hearing. Are you offering me advice, my king, or a warning? Neither, Draven said. I am simply telling you what is true. Whatever you are hiding, Ellie Marsh, I intend to find it before this trial ends. The only question that remains is whether I find it in time to save you, or too late to matter. He turned and walked back toward the platform, leaving her standing in the center of the hall, with the weight of his words settling over her like a stone. The holding chamber was a narrow stone room at the base of the pack's old watchtower, lit by a single high window that let in a thin blade of daylight. Ellie sat on the wooden bench along the far wall and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to slow the frantic beating of her heart. She had bought Noah time. That was all that mattered right now. Whatever came next, whatever price she had to pay, at least her brother was free. At least he was not the one sitting in this cold room, waiting for a trial that could end with banishment, or worse. She thought back to the years after their parents died, back when Noah was barely 12 years old, and she was 17, and suddenly, impossibly, the only thing standing between her little brother and complete ruin. They had slept in the old training barn for the better part of a year, because no one in the pack had room to take in 2 orphaned children of a family with no standing and no wealth. She had hunted for both of them. She had fought off 2 separate wolves, who thought a girl alone with a young boy made for easy prey. She had done whatever it took, every single day, to make sure Noah grew up safe. And 2 months ago, when the pack finally offered him a position in the war room, one of the most trusted postings a young wolf could hold, Ellie had cried tears of pure relief, for the first time in years. Noah had earned it through nothing but hard work and quiet loyalty. He deserved that honor. He deserved a future that did not begin and end with the shadow of their parents' deaths. She was not about to let someone else take that from him, whoever they were. Because someone had done this. Someone had stolen those war plans and handed them to a rival pack, and whoever that person was, they had been clever enough, or cruel enough, to make it look like Noah was responsible. Ellie did not know who. She did not know why. But she knew her brother, and she knew with absolute certainty that he had not betrayed the pack that had finally given him a place to belong. The door to the holding chamber creaked open, and a young guard named Callum stepped inside, carrying a plate of bread and a cup of water. He set them down on the small table without meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, I don't think you did it." "Thank you," Ellie said, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. "The Alpha King asked me to bring you a message," Callum added, glancing toward the door as though worried someone might overhear. "He said to tell you that questions have already begun. That the guards on duty 3 nights ago are being interviewed, one by one, starting tonight." Ellie's stomach twisted. If Draven began questioning the actual guards from that night, he would learn very quickly that her story did not hold together. He would learn she had not been anywhere near the war room. And once he learned that, The fragile lie she had built to protect her brother would collapse entirely, and there would be nothing left standing between Noah and the council's judgment. "Why would he tell you to warn me?" Ellie asked. Callum hesitated. "I don't think it was meant as a warning," he said. "I think he wants you to know the truth is coming out either way, whether you help it along or not." He left without another word, and Ellie sat alone in the thin blade of daylight, staring at the bread and water she had no appetite for, turning the guard's message over and over in her mind. 2 days. That was all she had before the trial. 2 days to either find some way to make her false confession believable, or 2 days to find the real traitor herself, before the Alpha King's investigation exposed her lie and left her brother exactly where she had been so desperate to keep him from ever standing. Outside the narrow window, the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains, and somewhere beyond the walls of the holding chamber, the true culprit behind the stolen war plans was still walking free, still watching, still waiting to see whether their carefully built deception would hold. Ellie closed her eyes and made herself a promise. Whatever it cost her, she would find them first. The night guard rotation had changed hands only an hour earlier, when Draven Ashford climbed the narrow stairs to the war room himself, choosing to see the space with his own eyes, rather than rely on second-hand reports. The room was small and windowless, lit by a single lantern hanging from an iron hook. A long table dominated the center, and on it sat the ledger that recorded every guard's arrival and departure for the past month. He ran his finger down the entries for the night in question. 2 names were listed for that shift. Noah Marsh was one of them, though his hours ended earlier than the theft was believed to have occurred. The second name belonged to a guard called Priya Doyle, a steady and well-respected wolf who had served the pack for nearly a decade without incident. Draven called for her the following morning. Priya arrived at the small meeting chamber adjoining the great hall with her hands folded in front of her, clearly nervous, but doing her best not to show it. She was older than most of the war room guards, with sharp eyes and a reputation for honesty that had earned her the post in the first place. "You were on duty the night the plans went missing," Draven said, without preamble. "Tell me everything you remember." "I arrived just after sunset," Priya said. "Noah left when his shift ended, a few hours before midnight. I remained until dawn, as scheduled." "Did anyone enter the war room during that time?" Priya hesitated, just slightly, but long enough that Draven noticed. "Councilman Renwick came by briefly," she said. "Close to midnight. He said he needed to review a supply report for the eastern border. I let him in because he outranks me, and because he has visited the war room on other occasions for similar reasons." "How long did he stay?" "Not long, perhaps 20 minutes. He left with the report rolled under his arm, same as always." Draven kept his expression carefully neutral, though his mind was already turning the information over from every angle. Renwick had access to the war room the very night the plans disappeared, and yet Renwick had been the loudest voice calling for Ellie's swift trial, the first to point suspicion toward Noah before any real investigation had even begun. "Did you see Ellie Marsh that night?" Draven asked. "At any point, inside or near the war room?" "No, my king. I never saw her. Not once. The entire shift." That confirmed what Draven had already suspected. Ellie's confession was a lie, though he still did not understand why she would risk her own life to protect a story that could not withstand even the simplest scrutiny. "Thank you, Priya. What you've told me stays between us for now." "Of course, my king." She hesitated at the door. "May I ask something?" "You may." "Do you believe Noah is guilty?" Draven considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe very little right now, except that the truth is not what it appears to be. That is usually where the most dangerous secrets hide." After Priya left, Draven remained in the meeting chamber alone, staring at the ledger he had brought with him from the war room. Renwick's visit that night was not, on its own, proof of anything. Councilmen visited the war room on legitimate business often enough, but the timing bothered him deeply, and so did the ferocity with which Renwick had pushed for Noah's guilt before any evidence had even been gathered. He thought of Ellie Marsh, standing in the center of the great hall with her chin lifted despite the fear he could smell rolling off her in waves. She had lied about details a child could have caught, and yet she had done it without hesitation, the moment her brother's name was spoken. That kind of loyalty was rare. It was also, Draven suspected, exactly the kind of loyalty someone clever enough could exploit. If someone wanted to frame Noah Marsh for treason, and they understood the bond between brother and sister, They might have anticipated precisely what Ellie would do. They might have counted on her stepping forward to take the blame, knowing it would remove attention from themselves and place it squarely on a young woman with no real defense to offer. It was a chilling thought, and the more Draven turned it over, the more it made a terrible kind of sense. He left the meeting chamber and made his way down to the holding chamber beneath the old watchtower, where Ellie had spent the night alone. The guard posted at the door stepped aside without question when he approached, and Draven entered to find her sitting exactly where he expected, back straight, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion clearly weighing on her. "Come to accuse me of something new?" she asked. "I spoke with Priya Doyle this morning," Draven said, ignoring the bite in her tone. "She was on duty, the night the plans disappeared. She never saw you anywhere near the war room." Ellie's face remained carefully composed, but he saw the flicker of alarm behind her eyes. "She must be mistaken." "She is not mistaken. She also told me that Councilman Renwick visited the war room that same night, close to midnight, and left with papers under his arm. An action, I might add, that no one thought to question until just now." Ellie's composure cracked, just slightly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you are protecting your brother with a lie that will not survive the trial. And I think whoever actually stole those plans is counting on exactly that. I think you have made yourself a shield for someone else's crime, without even realizing it." "If that's true," Ellie said slowly, "then why haven't you already cleared Noah's name? Why hold either of us at all?" "Because accusing a councilman of treason requires more than a guard's memory of a midnight visit," Draven said. "I need proof, not suspicion. And right now, the only person standing in the way of finding that proof is you, sitting in this cell, insisting on a confession that makes my investigation twice as difficult as it needs to be." Ellie was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting together in her lap. "If I tell you the truth," she said finally, "you have to promise me, Noah stays safe. Whatever happens to me, whatever the council decides, he cannot be the one who pays for this." "I cannot promise you anything until I understand what actually happened," Draven said. "But I can promise you this. If you continue lying to me, you will only make it easier for whoever framed your brother to succeed, and harder for me to protect either of you." Ellie studied him for a long moment, searching his face for some sign of deception, some hint that his offer was less genuine than it appeared. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, at least enough to continue. "I wasn't anywhere near the war room that night," she admitted quietly. "I confessed, because I was certain Noah was about to be blamed, and I could not let that happen. I don't know who actually stole those plans. I don't know why they wanted it to look like my brother was responsible. All I know is that he would never betray this pack, not after everything it finally gave him." "Then we agree on something," Draven said. "Because I do not believe he is guilty either. Which means someone else is walking free right now, confident that an innocent young man and his sister will pay for their crime instead. What do? "We find them," Draven said. "Before the trial. Before the council decides your fate based on a confession that was never true in the first place." For the first time since she had entered the Great Hall the previous day, Ellie felt something other than fear settle into her chest. It was not quite hope, not yet, but it was close enough to matter. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You barely know me. For all you know, I could still be lying about everything." "You could be," Draven agreed, "but my instincts tell me otherwise. And in 9 years as this pack's leader, I have learned not to ignore them. Besides," he added, moving toward the door, "if someone within my own council is bold enough to frame 2 innocent wolves for treason, I intend to know exactly who they are, and exactly what they were hoping to gain by it." He left her with those words hanging in the cold air of the holding chamber, and for the first time since her arrest, Ellie allowed herself to believe that the truth might actually have a chance of surfacing before it was too late. Word of Ellie's arrest spread through the pack faster than fire through dry grass. By the time the sun rose fully over the training grounds, nearly every wolf in Ashford territory had heard some version of the story, and most versions were far less kind than the truth. Noah returned to the small cottage he shared with his sister, only to find its door marked with a smear of ash, a silent accusation left by someone in the night. He scrubbed at it until his knuckles bled, but the stain of suspicion could not be washed away so easily. Neighbors who once nodded to him in the market now crossed to the other side of the road. A boy he had trained alongside for years refused to meet his eyes. He tried to see his sister twice that first day, and was turned away both times by guards, following strict orders from the council. By the second refusal, something in him snapped, and he found himself standing outside the meeting chamber, where several councilmen had gathered, demanding answers no one seemed willing to give. "She didn't do this," Noah said, his voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. "You all know her. She has served this pack faithfully since she was old enough to hunt. Why is no one asking who actually stole those plans?" Renwick Hale emerged from the chamber at the sound of raised voices, his expression a careful mixture of sympathy and disappointment that Noah found deeply unconvincing. "We understand this is difficult," Renwick said, "but your sister confessed with her own mouth, in front of the entire council. What would you have us do? Ignore a confession, simply because it is inconvenient for you?" "I would have you ask why she confessed at all," Noah shot back. "I would have you look at who actually had access to that room, instead of deciding my sister's guilt before a single witness was questioned." "The Alpha King is conducting his own inquiry," Renwick said smoothly. "If there is more to uncover, I am certain he will uncover it. In the meantime, I suggest you return home and let the process run its course, unless you wish to draw further suspicion onto yourself." The threat, thinly veiled as it was, landed exactly as intended. Noah felt the eyes of nearby wolves settling on him, weighing his outburst, wondering perhaps if there was truth buried somewhere in his desperation. He forced himself to step back, to swallow the anger rising in his throat, because he understood that anything he said now could be twisted into further evidence against the sister he was trying so hard to protect. He left the meeting chamber and wandered aimlessly through the pack grounds until he found himself outside the small training barn, where he and Ellie had once slept as children, with nowhere else to go. The building had fallen into disrepair over the years, its roof sagging, its walls streaked with weather stains, but something about its familiar shape steadied him. He sat on the old wooden step and let himself remember, for just a moment, exactly what his sister had sacrificed to raise him. The hunting trips in winters so cold, her hands cracked and bled. The nights she went hungry so he could eat. The two men who had once cornered her near the river, thinking a girl alone would not fight back, and how she had proven them badly wrong, coming home with torn clothes and a fierce, unshakable calm that told him everything he needed to know about how far she would go to keep him safe. She was doing it again now, throwing herself into danger without hesitation, the moment she believed his future was at risk. And Noah understood, sitting there in the fading afternoon light, that he could not simply wait quietly for the trial to unfold. He could not let her carry this burden alone. Not again. Not after everything she had already given up for him. He needed to find out who had actually stolen those war plans, and he needed to do it before the 2 days Ellie had been given ran out. His first thought was of Mira Todd, a young guard he had trained alongside during his early months in the war room. Mira had worked several shifts that overlapped with his own, and if anyone might have noticed something unusual in the days leading up to the theft, it would be her. He found her near the eastern barracks, sharpening a blade with slow, practiced strokes. "Noah." She looked up, surprised, then quickly glanced around to see who might be watching before lowering her voice. "You shouldn't be seen talking to me, not with everything going on." "I need your help," Noah said quietly. "Please. My sister is innocent, and I think someone set this up to look like it was me." Mira's hands stilled on the blade. "What makes you say that?" "Because I never took anything from that room, and someone clearly wanted the council to believe otherwise." "Did you notice anything strange in the days before the plans went missing? Anyone acting differently? Anyone who shouldn't have had reason to be near the war room?" Mira was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to say. Finally, she set down the blade entirely. "There was one thing," she said. "A few days before the theft, I noticed the access ledger had a torn page. Just a small tear, near the binding, like someone had removed an entry and tried to make it look like normal wear. I mentioned it to the head guard at the time, but he brushed it off as nothing important." Noah's pulse quickened. "Do you remember which page was missing? Which date?" "I don't remember exactly, but it was close to the night in question. I could try to find the head guard again, see if he remembers more than he let on." "Please," Noah said, "anything you can find. My sister doesn't have much time." Mira nodded slowly, glancing once more toward the barracks to make sure no one had overheard their conversation. "I'll ask around quietly. But Noah, if someone truly did this on purpose, And they're clever enough to tear pages from a ledger without anyone noticing at the time. They're clever enough to have covered their tracks in other ways too. Be careful who you ask, and be careful who hears you asking. Noah thanked her and continued through the pack grounds with a renewed sense of purpose, though the warning stayed with him. Whoever had orchestrated this had planned carefully, patiently, and with a level of precision that suggested they understood exactly how the pack systems worked, and exactly how to manipulate them without drawing suspicion to themselves. That kind of knowledge did not belong to just anyone. It belonged to someone with real authority, someone trusted enough to move through restricted spaces without a second glance. As the sun began to set over the pack grounds, Noah found himself standing near the great hall once more, watching councilmen come and go through its heavy doors, wondering which among them might be capable of sacrificing 2 innocent lives, simply to protect their own hidden ambitions. He did not yet have a name, but for the first time since his sister's arrest, he had something almost as valuable, a thread to pull, and the growing certainty that somewhere within the pack's own leadership, a traitor was hiding in plain sight. By the second day of Ellie's confinement, the pack grounds had grown thick with tension. Word had spread that the Alpha King himself was delaying the trial, questioning guards and reviewing old records instead of simply accepting the confession that had already been given. Some wolves whispered that this meant Draven suspected something deeper. Others whispered that he was merely being cautious, unwilling to execute judgment without the appearance of thoroughness. Renwick Hale found the delay intolerable. He paced the length of his private study, a narrow room lined with shelves of old ledgers and maps, his mind working quickly to assess how much danger truly threatened him. He had not expected Draven to press so hard. A confession, freely given in front of the entire council, should have been more than sufficient grounds for a swift judgment. Instead, the Alpha King was turning over stones that Renwick had believed long buried. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts, and Soren Blake slipped into the study without waiting for permission, closing the door quietly behind him. "You look troubled," Soren said, dropping into the chair across from Renwick's desk, with the casual ease of a man who believed himself untouchable. "The girl's confession was supposed to end this," Renwick said sharply. "Instead, Draven is questioning the war room guards one by one. He spoke with Priya Doyle yesterday morning." Soren's easy expression faltered slightly. "What did she tell him?" "I don't know exactly, but it cannot be good. If she mentioned my visit to the war room that night, Draven will have questions I am not prepared to answer." "You told me that visit was ordinary," Soren said, a note of accusation creeping into his voice. "You said no one would think twice about a councilman reviewing supply reports." "No one should have," Renwick snapped. "But Draven is not a fool, whatever else he may be. If he begins connecting the timing of my visit to the timing of the theft, our entire arrangement collapses, and it collapses on top of both of us." Soren rose from his chair and moved toward the window, staring out at the darkening pack grounds below. "We agreed this would be simple. Frame the boy, let the girl take the blame if she was foolish enough to offer it, and walk away with our arrangement intact. You said the rival pack would pay handsomely for those plans, and they did. You said no one would ever look twice at either of us." "And no one would have," Renwick said, "if Draven had simply accepted the confession as given. Instead, he is unraveling exactly the details we counted on remaining hidden." "Then we need to make certain he finds nothing more," Soren said quietly. "Or we need to give him something else to find instead. Something that points even further away from us." Renwick considered this for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the surface of his desk. The guard, Priya. If she has already spoken to Draven, silencing her now would only draw more suspicion, not less. But perhaps there is another way. "What do you propose?" "The girl, Ellie, still holds to her original confession, at least as far as the council knows. If we can ensure the trial proceeds swiftly, before Draven gathers anything conclusive, her confession stands. The matter is closed, and both of us remain exactly where we are, untouched. And if Draven refuses to allow the trial to proceed?" Renwick's expression darkened. "Then we may need to remind the council why haste, in matters of pack security, is sometimes preferable to prolonged investigation. A pack that appears divided over a simple case of treason invites doubt from every rival watching our borders. I can make that argument convincingly enough, if it comes to it." Soren nodded slowly, though something in his posture suggested he was not entirely at ease with the plan. "And if it doesn't work?" If Draven continues digging regardless of what the council decides, then we will deal with that when it happens, Renwick said. For now, our priority is ensuring the trial moves forward on schedule, before anyone else begins asking the kind of questions that could unravel everything we've built. Neither man noticed the guard stationed just beyond the study door, close enough to hear voices but not close enough to make out every word clearly. Callum had been assigned to patrol this corridor for the evening, a routine task he had performed dozens of times before without incident. Tonight, something about the tension in Renwick's voice, carrying faintly through the heavy wood, made him pause and listen more closely than usual. He caught only fragments. A mention of the trial proceeding swiftly, a reference to the girl's confession standing, a warning about someone continuing to dig. It was not enough to understand the full scope of what was being discussed, but it was enough to trouble him deeply, especially given what he already suspected about Ellie's innocence. Callum finished his patrol route and made his way directly to the small chamber where the Alpha King often reviewed reports late into the evening. He found Draven exactly where he expected, a single candle burning low beside a stack of old guard ledgers. "My king," Callum said, bowing slightly. "I overheard something tonight that I believe you should know." Draven set down the ledger he had been reviewing. "Go on." Councilman Renwick was meeting with Soren Blake in his study. I only caught pieces of their conversation, but they spoke of the trial proceeding swiftly, and of someone continuing to dig, as though it were a danger to them. I did not understand the full meaning, but the tone of it troubled me enough to report it. Draven's expression sharpened, the exhaustion of the past 2 days momentarily forgotten. Soren Blake, the disgraced beta, who was stripped of his patrol duties last year for unauthorized dealings with traitors outside Pact territory. "The same, my king." Draven rose from his seat, his mind already working through the implications. Renwick had visited the war room the night of the theft. Renwick was now meeting privately with a wolf known for questionable dealings outside Pact borders, discussing the trial in terms that suggested fear rather than simple political interest. The pieces were beginning to align into a shape Draven did not like at all. "Thank you, Callum. You've done well to bring this to me. Continue your patrols as normal, and if you hear anything further, come to me directly, and no one else." After Callum left, Draven remained standing in the quiet chamber, turning the new information over in his mind. If Renwick and Soren were indeed responsible for the stolen war plans, they would not simply allow his investigation to continue unchallenged. They would push for a swift trial, exactly as Callum had overheard, hoping to close the matter before Draven uncovered enough proof to expose them. Which meant Draven now had very little time remaining to gather the evidence he needed. If the council forced the trial forward before he was ready, Ellie's false confession would stand unchallenged. Noah would remain forever shadowed by suspicion, and the true traitors would walk free, having successfully sacrificed 2 innocent lives to protect their own scheme. He would not allow that to happen, but time, which had already felt impossibly short, now felt shorter still, and Draven understood that whatever move he made next would need to be both swift and absolutely certain, because Renwick would not give him a second chance to expose the truth once the trial began. The following morning, Draven summoned the head guard, responsible for maintaining the war room's access ledger, a stern older wolf named Garrick, who had served the Pack for over 20 years without a single complaint against his record. Draven laid the ledger on the table between them, open to the page Mira Todd had mentioned to Noah, the one with the small tear near its binding. "Tell me about this page," Draven said. Garrick studied it carefully, his brow furrowing. "I remember this. A guard brought it to my attention some days before the theft, said the page looked torn, like an entry had been removed. I examined it myself, and concluded it was simple wear. Ledgers are handled roughly sometimes, my king. Pages tear. Show me exactly where the tear begins." Garrick pointed to a jagged line near the spine of the book, close to where an entry would have been recorded for a visit several days before the theft occurred. Draven studied it closely, running his finger along the torn edge, noting how cleanly it separated, compared to the natural wear visible on other pages throughout the ledger. "This was not torn by rough handling," Draven said. "This was cut, carefully, and then torn further to disguise the clean edge underneath. Someone removed an entry from this ledger and wanted it to look accidental." Garrick's face paled slightly. "My king, I did not think to examine it so closely at the time. If I had known..." You had no reason to suspect deception in a routine ledger, Draven said. But now we do. I want you to check every remaining page against the guard schedule for the past month. If any other entries appear altered, removed, or inconsistent with what the guards themselves recall, I want to know immediately. Garrick nodded and set to work at once, poring over the ledger page by page, with the careful attention of a man determined to make up for his earlier oversight. Draven left him to the task, and made his way toward the holding chamber, where Ellie had spent 3 days now waiting for a trial that grew closer with every passing hour. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression had changed since their conversation 2 days before. The defiance remained, but exhaustion had settled into the lines around her eyes, and Draven felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the young woman who had thrown herself into danger for no reason, beyond love for her brother. "Has something happened?" she asked. "The ledger that records visits to the war room has a torn page," Draven said. "Cut deliberately, then torn to disguise it as ordinary wear. Someone removed evidence of a visit, close to the night your brother's plans were stolen." Ellie sat forward. "Do you know who?" "Not yet with certainty, but I have reason to suspect Councilman Renwick, and possibly a former beta named Soren Blake. One of my guards overheard them discussing the trial last night in terms that suggested fear, not simple political concern. They spoke of ensuring the trial proceeds swiftly, before further evidence surfaces. Renwick was the first to call for my trial," Ellie said slowly. "The very moment I confessed, he moved to have me sentenced without hearing a single witness." "Exactly the behavior of a man, eager to close a case before it can be examined too closely," Draven agreed. "But suspicion alone will not be enough to convince the council. Renwick holds significant influence among the older members, and Soren, whatever his past disgrace, still commands loyalty from wolves, who resent his fall from grace. If I accuse them without airtight proof, I risk dividing the pack at a moment when unity matters most. Then what do? We need proof that cannot be argued away. A witness who saw them together planning this, or documents connecting them directly to the rival pack that received the stolen plans. Something the council cannot dismiss as mere coincidence, or a guard's overactive imagination." Ellie was quiet for a moment, thinking. Noah has been asking questions too. He spoke with a guard named Mira, the one who first noticed the torn ledger page. If he continues digging, he might uncover something useful, but he could also put himself in danger if Renwick and Soren realize he's investigating them. "I had not considered that Noah might be conducting his own inquiry," Draven admitted. "That could be useful, or it could be reckless, depending on how carefully he moves." "He's careful," Ellie said, a note of fierce pride entering her voice despite everything. "He's smarter than most people give him credit for. If you gave him a task, something specific to look into, he would do it well." Draven considered this. Working with Noah directly carried risk, but it also offered an advantage Draven currently lacked: someone within the war room's own ranks, trusted enough by junior guards to ask questions without immediately raising suspicion. "Very well," Draven said. "I will speak with your brother directly. If he is willing, I have a task that may help us gather the proof we need, but it will require both patience and considerable caution. One misstep, and Renwick will realize we are closing in on him, and he will move to protect himself in ways that could prove far more dangerous than a simple false confession." "What kind of task?" "I intend to draw Renwick and Soren into revealing themselves," Draven said, "using information they believe is still secret. If they act to protect that secret, they will expose their own guilt in the process. But it requires someone they would never suspect of working against them, someone whose loyalty appears entirely elsewhere." Ellie's eyes widened slightly as she understood the shape of what he was suggesting. "You want to use Noah as bait." "Not bait," Draven corrected gently. "A messenger. Someone trusted enough within the war room to plant a piece of false information that only the true traitor would feel compelled to act upon. If Renwick and Soren believe a second exchange of documents is planned, and they move to prevent it or intercept it themselves, they will reveal exactly how deeply involved they truly are." Ellie studied him for a long moment, weighing the risk against the alternative, which was watching her brother's name remain forever shadowed by suspicion while the true traitors walked free. "If it protects Noah in the end," she said finally, "then I trust you to see it done carefully." "I intend to," Draven said. "Because this plan carries risk, not only for your brother, but for the pack itself. If it goes wrong, I would not propose it if I saw any safer path toward the truth." He left the holding chamber with a clearer sense of purpose than he had carried in days, though the weight of what lay ahead settled heavily across his shoulders. Time remained desperately short. Renwick and Soren remained dangerous, and the trap he intended to set would need to be built with absolute precision if it was to succeed before the trial forced a verdict neither Draven nor Ellie could accept. Noah met with the Alpha King that same evening in a small chamber tucked away from the busier halls of the Pack estate, chosen deliberately for its distance from prying eyes and ears. Draven laid out his plan carefully, watching Noah's face for any sign of hesitation as he explained exactly what would be required of him. "You want me to plant false information," Noah said slowly, "and let it reach Renwick, hoping he reacts to protect himself." "Precisely," Draven said. "You will tell a fellow guard, someone you trust, to pass along gossip without questioning it too closely, that a second set of documents is being prepared for transfer, similar in nature to the ones already stolen. You will make it sound as though this information came to you through your continued work in the war room, entirely unrelated to your sister's situation, and if Renwick doesn't take the bait, if he's cautious enough to ignore rumors from a guard already under suspicion, then we lose nothing but time we have already spent," Draven said. "But I suspect he will not be able to resist. A man desperate to conceal one theft cannot afford to risk a second one surfacing and drawing renewed attention to the first. He will want to know if the rumor is true, and more importantly, he will want to control how it unfolds, which means he will need to act, either to intercept the supposed documents himself or to ensure someone else takes the blame before the truth surfaces." Noah considered this carefully. "What happens if he moves against me directly? If he decides removing me entirely is safer than risking exposure?" "You will not be alone," Draven said. "I will have guards positioned nearby at all times. Wolves I trust completely, chosen specifically because they have no connection to Renwick or Soren. You will not take a single step in this plan without protection close enough to intervene. And Ellie? What happens to her while all of this unfolds? She remains in the holding chamber, as the council expects, maintaining her original confession for now. If we succeed in exposing the truth before the trial, her confession becomes irrelevant. If we fail," Draven paused, choosing his next words carefully, "then I will need to find another way to delay the proceedings until we have gathered enough evidence, whatever that requires." Noah studied the Alpha King for a long moment, searching for any hint of hesitation or deception in his expression. He found none, only the steady, calculating focus of a leader who had clearly spent every waking hour since the confession working to untangle a plot far more complicated than a simple guard's mistake. "I'll do it," Noah said finally. "Whatever you need. My sister has spent her entire life protecting me. I won't stand by and let her pay for a crime neither of us committed." The following day, Noah approached a guard he had known since childhood, a talkative young wolf named Elias, who had never once managed to keep a piece of interesting gossip to himself for longer than an hour. Noah mentioned, in careful and casual tones, that he had overheard something troubling during a brief return to the war room to collect personal belongings. A whisper among senior guards about a second set of border strategies being prepared for transfer to reinforce pack defenses against the very rival that had received the first stolen plans. Elias, exactly as predicted, could not resist sharing the rumor within hours, and by evening, word had reached the ears of several councilmen, including, as Draven had hoped, Renwick Hale. Draven watched from a discreet distance as Renwick's expression shifted upon hearing the rumor secondhand from a nervous junior councilman, a flicker of alarm crossing his face before he composed himself into careful neutrality. That evening, Renwick once again sought out Soren Blake, and this time, Draven had ensured that Callum, along with 2 additional trusted guards, were positioned close enough to hear every word exchanged. "Have you heard this rumor about a second exchange?" Renwick demanded the moment Soren entered his study. "I've heard it," Soren said, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "Do you believe it's true?" "I don't know what to believe, which is precisely the problem. If there truly is a second set of documents being prepared, and someone intercepts them before we do, our previous arrangement becomes worthless, and worse, it draws exactly the kind of scrutiny we cannot afford right now. Then we need to find out who is preparing them, and where," Soren said. "If the rumor is true, we should act quickly, before Draven's own people move to secure the documents themselves." "Agreed," Renwick said. "I will use my position to request access to the war room again. under the guise of reviewing supply concerns, exactly as before. If there truly is something worth taking, I intend to see it secured before anyone else has the chance. Callum, listening carefully from his position outside the study, felt his pulse quicken at the confirmation of exactly the trap Draven had hoped to spring. Renwick had all but confirmed his intention to enter the war room under false pretenses once again, precisely the kind of action that would prove impossible to explain away as innocent coincidence a second time. He reported back to Draven immediately, relaying every word of the conversation with careful precision. Draven listened with grim satisfaction, understanding that the trap was finally closing exactly as intended. Renwick intends to enter the war room again, believing he will find evidence of a second theft in progress, Draven said. When he arrives, we will be waiting, and this time, there will be no ledger page to tear, no guard's testimony to dismiss as unreliable. He will be caught in the act of exactly the crime he has spent days trying to pin on two innocent people. And Soren? Callum asked. If he accompanies Renwick, as their conversation suggests he might, we will have both traitors exposed in a single stroke. If not, Renwick's own actions will be more than sufficient to unravel whatever protection Soren believed their partnership afforded him. As night fell over the pack grounds, Draven positioned his most trusted guards throughout the corridors surrounding the war room, careful to remain unseen, patient in the way only wolves who understood the true stakes of the coming confrontation could manage. Somewhere beyond the walls of the holding chamber, Ellie waited, unaware that the trap set in her brother's name was finally, after days of careful maneuvering, ready to close around the true traitors, who had tried to destroy her family, for their own hidden gain. Midnight arrived with a stillness that seemed to press down on the entire pack estate, as though even the wind had chosen to hold its breath in anticipation of what was about to unfold. Draven stood in the shadowed alcove across from the war room entrance, his senses stretched taut, listening for the faintest sound of approaching footsteps. Beside him, Callum shifted his weight silently, his hand resting near the hilt of the blade at his side, though Draven had made clear that this operation was meant to end in capture and confession, not violence, unless circumstances left them no other choice. Noah waited nearby as well, positioned just close enough to observe without being seen, his heart pounding so loudly in his own ears that he wondered whether the guards around him could hear it too. He had insisted on being present when Draven finalized the plan for the evening, unwilling to remain at a distance while the fate of his sister hung in the balance. "You should not be this close," Draven had warned him earlier. "If something goes wrong, I need you safe, not caught in the middle of a confrontation with two wolves, who have already shown they are willing to sacrifice innocent lives to protect themselves." "I understand the risk," Noah had answered. "But I need to see this through. I need to know, with my own eyes, that whoever did this to my sister is finally exposed." Draven had relented, on the condition that Noah remain far enough back to stay out of immediate danger, a compromise that satisfied neither of them fully, but that both had accepted as necessary. Now, standing in the darkness, Noah watched as a figure approached the war room entrance from the eastern corridor, moving with the careful, unhurried gait of someone who believed themselves entirely unobserved. Renwick Hale reached the door and paused, glancing once in each direction, before producing a key that granted him access to the restricted chamber. Draven's hand rose slightly, a silent signal to the guards positioned throughout the corridor to hold their positions and wait. Renwick disappeared inside the war room, and for several long moments, nothing happened at all, the silence stretching taut enough that Noah found himself holding his breath without realizing it. Then a second figure appeared, moving more quickly than Renwick had, slipping through the same corridor with far less caution. Soren Blake reached the war room entrance and let himself inside without hesitation, clearly expecting to find Renwick already waiting. Draven allowed several more minutes to pass, giving both men enough time to fully commit to whatever search they had come to conduct, before finally giving the signal to move. The guards converged on the war room entrance with practiced efficiency, and Draven himself led the way inside, pushing the heavy door open to reveal Renwick and Soren, standing over the long table, papers scattered across its surface, as they searched frantically for documents that did not exist. Both men froze at the sudden intrusion, and for a moment, the war room fell into a silence so complete that Noah, watching from the corridor beyond, could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. "My king," Renwick said, recovering his composure with visible effort. I was simply reviewing supply concerns, as I have done many times before. I did not expect to find you here at such an hour. Save the explanation for the council, Draven said, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument. There is no supply report scheduled for review tonight, Councilman, and there never was. You came searching for documents that a rumor suggested might exist, documents you believed you needed to intercept or destroy before anyone else could discover them. Soren's face had gone pale, his eyes darting toward the door as though searching for some avenue of escape that clearly did not exist, given the number of guards now filling the corridor beyond. This is absurd, Renwick said, though the confidence had drained noticeably from his voice. A rumor, nothing more. I came to verify whether there was any truth to it, out of concern for the pack's security, exactly as any responsible councilman would. Then perhaps you can explain, Draven said, why the ledger page recording your visit here, on the night the original war plans were stolen, was deliberately torn from the record. Or why Priya Doyle, who was on duty that same night, confirms you left this room carrying papers you claimed were nothing more than a routine supply document. Renwick's mouth opened, then closed again, no ready explanation forming quickly enough to counter the accusation. And perhaps, Draven continued, turning his gaze toward Soren, you can explain your own presence here tonight, given that you hold no official position within this pack that would grant you legitimate reason to enter this room at all. Soren said nothing, his silence far more damning than any denial could have been. Take them both to the holding chambers, Draven ordered the guards. Separate cells. I want no opportunity for them to coordinate their story before the trial. As the guards moved to restrain the two men, Renwick's composure finally shattered entirely, and he turned toward Draven with something approaching desperation in his eyes. You do not understand what you are doing, he said. The pack needs stability right now, not further scandal. If word spreads that a councilman conspired against the pack's own security, it will weaken confidence in this entire council. Weaken confidence in your own leadership. What weakens confidence in my leadership, Draven said coldly, is allowing two innocent people to suffer for a crime committed by someone entrusted with far greater responsibility than either of them ever held. I will not sacrifice the truth simply to protect this council's comfort. Renwick had no answer for that, and the guards led him away in silence, Soren following close behind, his earlier bravado entirely extinguished. Noah stepped forward from his position in the corridor the moment the war room had been cleared, his legs unsteady with relief, so overwhelming it nearly buckled his knees entirely. It's done, he said quietly, almost unable to believe the words as he spoke them. You actually caught them. We caught them, Draven corrected. This required your willingness to serve as bait for a rumor that could easily have gone badly wrong. Your sister's instincts about your character were entirely correct. Does this mean Ellie is free? Does this mean the trial is over? Not yet, Draven said. We have caught them in the act tonight, but the full trial before the council still needs to proceed, so that everyone within this pack understands exactly what happened, and exactly why your sister's false confession should never have been accepted so readily in the first place. But yes, Noah, this means the truth is finally within reach, and neither you nor your sister will need to carry the weight of someone else's crime any longer. Relief and exhaustion washed over Noah in equal measure as he followed Draven out of the war room and into the cool night air beyond, the weight that had settled over his shoulders for days, finally beginning, at last, to lift. News of the capture reached the holding chamber before Draven himself did, carried by a breathless young guard who could barely contain her excitement at delivering it. Ellie rose from the wooden bench the moment the door opened, her heart lodged somewhere in her throat, as she waited to hear whether the story was true or merely another rumor twisted by fear and hope in equal measure. When Draven appeared moments later, with Noah close behind him, she knew instantly from her brother's face that everything had changed. They caught them, Noah said, crossing the small room in 3 quick strides to pull his sister into a fierce embrace. Renwick and Soren, caught inside the war room itself, searching for documents that never existed. It's over, Ellie. It's actually over. Ellie clung to her brother for a long moment, relief crashing over her in waves, so powerful she felt momentarily unsteady on her feet. When she finally stepped back, she turned toward Draven, searching his expression for confirmation that this was truly real, and not simply a cruel trick of exhaustion and desperate hope. It's true, Draven said simply. Both men are being held separately as we speak. Renwick attempted to deny everything, but the evidence against him has grown considerably more difficult to explain away. "Thank you," Ellie said, and the words felt entirely insufficient for everything he had done. Yet she could not immediately find better ones. "You didn't have to believe me. You didn't have to keep looking. Once I gave you a confession that should have ended this days ago. I told you the truth was not what it appeared to be," Draven said. "I simply followed that instinct until it led somewhere solid enough to act upon. Your brother's courage tonight made the difference between suspicion and proof." Noah shook his head slightly. "I only did what you asked of me. Ellie is the one who stood in front of the entire council and took a punishment that was never hers to bear, simply to buy me time. Whatever happens from here, I won't forget that." The reunion, however, could not last uninterrupted for long. Within the hour, word arrived that Renwick, despite being held in a separate cell from Soren, had managed to send a message through a sympathetic guard still loyal to his position, requesting an audience with several senior council members before the formal trial could proceed. Draven met with the councilman in question personally, determined to understand exactly what Renwick hoped to accomplish with such a request. "He claims he has additional information to share," one of the elder councilmen explained, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation unfolding around a colleague he had known for many years. "He insists that the full truth of what happened is more complicated than simple guilt or innocence, and that the pack deserves to hear his side before final judgment is rendered." "And what does he intend to claim?" Draven asked. "He would not say specifically, only that he believes certain conclusions are being drawn too hastily, and that others within the pack bear responsibility alongside him." Draven considered this carefully. Renwick was clearly searching for any avenue that might distribute blame widely enough to soften his own punishment, perhaps by implicating additional wolves, whether guilty or not, in an attempt to muddy the clarity of the evidence already gathered against him. "He will have his chance to speak," Draven said, "at the formal trial, before the full council, and in view of every wolf who wishes to attend. I will not grant him a private audience where he might attempt to negotiate a lesser judgment away from public scrutiny." The elder councilman nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Some among us worry that a public trial involving a councilman's treason will damage the pack's standing considerably. Perhaps a quieter resolution would serve everyone better." "A quieter resolution," Draven said firmly, "would serve only Renwick and Soren, allowing them to escape full accountability, while an innocent woman's confession remains part of the pack's official record. An injustice this pack cannot afford to leave unaddressed. The trial will proceed exactly as scheduled, in full view of everyone." That evening, as preparations for the formal trial continued, Draven found himself once more in the small chamber where Ellie and Noah had been permitted to wait together, their fates no longer separated by suspicion, but still not entirely resolved until the council rendered its final judgment. "Renwick is attempting to spread blame before the trial even begins," Draven told them. "He may try to claim others share responsibility, perhaps hoping to create enough confusion that the council hesitates to render a clear verdict against him." "Can he actually succeed with that?" Ellie asked, worry creeping back into her voice, despite the relief of the past few hours. "Not with the evidence we have gathered," Draven said, "but I want both of you prepared for the possibility that he may attempt to draw your names back into the proceedings, perhaps suggesting that your original confession, Ellie, indicates some deeper involvement rather than simple sisterly devotion. A desperate man will grasp at whatever explanation offers him the best chance of survival." "Let him try," Ellie said, her chin lifting with the same defiant resolve Draven had first noticed the moment she stepped into the Great Hall days earlier. "I told the truth eventually. I trust the council to recognize the difference between a lie, meant to protect someone innocent, and lies meant to conceal treason for personal gain. That is precisely the distinction I intend to make unmistakably clear tomorrow," Draven said. "Renwick and Soren conspired for their own benefit, likely profiting from whatever arrangement they struck with the rival pack that received the stolen plans. You confessed falsely out of love for your brother, a mistake perhaps, but one born from devotion rather than betrayal. The council will understand that difference, because I intend to ensure they cannot possibly mistake one for the other." Noah reached for his sister's hand, squeezing it gently. "Tomorrow, this finally ends, one way or another." "Tomorrow," Draven agreed. "The truth stands before the entire pack, without shadows left to hide behind. Renwick and Soren will answer for what they have done, and this pack will begin the process of healing from a betrayal that struck far closer to its own leadership than anyone wished to believe possible. As night deepened over the Pack estate, preparations continued for the trial that would finally bring clarity to days of suspicion, fear, and carefully hidden treachery, each of them aware that tomorrow would determine not only the fate of two guilty men, but the full restoration of a family nearly destroyed by a betrayal that had never been theirs to bear in the first place. The Great Hall had never held so many wolves at once. Word of the previous night's events had spread through every corner of the Pack, and by the time the council gathered for the formal trial, the stone chamber overflowed with wolves eager to witness the truth unfold with their own eyes. Ellie stood near the center of the hall once more, though this time Noah stood beside her, and the guards flanking them wore expressions of quiet respect rather than suspicion. Renwick and Soren were led in separately, both bound in silver chain that dulled their strength, their expressions carrying none of the confidence either man had displayed only days before. Renwick's eyes swept across the crowded hall, searching perhaps for some sympathetic face among the councilmen he had served alongside for years, but finding mostly closed, wary expressions in return. Draven took his position at the head of the platform, and when he spoke, his voice carried easily to every corner of the Pack chamber. 3 nights ago, the war plans of this Pack were discovered in the hands of a rival territory, information that could have cost countless lives had it gone unnoticed. Ellie Marsh confessed to this theft, believing her confession would protect her brother from suspicion he did not deserve. That confession was false, offered out of love rather than guilt, and it very nearly allowed the true traitors to escape justice entirely. A murmur swept through the assembled crowd, though Draven raised a hand slightly, and the hall quieted once more. Last night, Councilman Renwick Hale and the wolf Soren Blake were discovered inside the war room, searching for documents that existed only as a deliberately planted rumor, designed to expose exactly the kind of guilty urgency that innocent wolves would never display. I have gathered testimony from guards on duty the night of the original theft, evidence of a deliberately altered ledger meant to conceal Renwick's presence in the war room that same night, and now, direct evidence of both men attempting to intercept documents they believed still needed to be secured or destroyed. Renwick straightened, attempting one final show of defiance. This is a fabrication, built on rumor and coincidence. I visited the war room that night on legitimate business, exactly as I have many times before, nothing more. Then perhaps you can explain, Draven said, why Priya Doyle, who was on duty that night, testified that you left carrying papers you claimed were routine, at an hour when no routine supply review has ever been conducted in this Pack's history, or why the ledger page recording that visit shows clear signs of deliberate tampering, cut and torn to disguise the removal of an entry you did not wish anyone to examine closely. Renwick had no answer, his silence stretching uncomfortably across the hushed hall. And perhaps, Draven continued, turning his attention toward Soren, you can explain your own presence in a restricted chamber you held no legitimate authority to enter, at midnight, searching alongside a councilman for documents based on nothing more than an unconfirmed rumor. What legitimate purpose could explain such actions, if not guilt in the original theft, and fear of a second exposure surfacing? Soren's composure finally cracked entirely under the weight of the assembled evidence and the eyes of every wolf watching him. It was never meant to harm the Pack, he said, his voice barely carrying across the silent chamber. The rival Pack offered payment far beyond what either of us could earn through honest service. We believed the plans would be used cautiously, that no real harm would come from the exchange. A furious murmur erupted across the hall at this admission, wolves turning to one another in shocked disbelief that a member of their own council had sold the Pack's security for personal gain. And when suspicion needed somewhere else to fall, Draven pressed, his voice hardening further, you chose an innocent young guard who had only recently earned his place within this Pack's trust, and when his sister stepped forward to protect him, you allowed her false confession to stand, rather than risk your own exposure. Renwick's shoulders sagged, the last of his defiance draining away entirely. We believed it would end quickly, he admitted quietly. We did not anticipate you would investigate so thoroughly, nor that the girl's brother would prove clever enough to help expose us. The admission, spoken now in front of the entire assembled Pack, left no remaining doubt as to the truth of what had transpired. Draven turned his attention toward the full council, allowing the weight of the confession to settle fully before continuing. You have heard, from their own mouths, the truth of what occurred. Renwick Hale and Soren Blake conspired to steal this pack's war plans for personal profit, and when suspicion threatened to expose them, they allowed two innocent people to bear the consequences of their crime. I ask this council to render judgment accordingly, with the full weight of evidence now before you. The council deliberated only briefly before delivering their verdict, the outcome scarcely in question, given everything that had been revealed. Renwick and Soren were stripped of all rank, position, and standing within the pack, and banished from Ashford territory entirely, forbidden from ever returning under threat of severe consequence should they attempt to do so. As guards led the two disgraced men from the hall, Renwick cast one final glance toward Ellie and Noah, though whatever he intended to say in that moment remained unspoken, swallowed by the weight of his own downfall as the great doors closed behind him. Draven turned to address the crowd once more, his gaze finding Ellie and Noah standing together near the center of the hall. "Let it also be recorded," he said, "that Ellie Marsh, though she offered a false confession, did so out of devotion to her brother, rather than any genuine guilt, and that her willingness to sacrifice herself for his protection speaks to a character this pack should honor, rather than continue to doubt." Noah Marsh, meanwhile, displayed considerable courage in assisting this investigation, risking his own safety to help expose the truth. Both siblings leave this hall with their names fully restored, and with this pack's gratitude for their part in uncovering a betrayal that struck far deeper than any of us initially understood. A wave of applause and approving murmurs swept through the crowded hall, and for the first time in days, Ellie felt the weight of suspicion and fear lift entirely from her shoulders, replaced instead by something she had not expected to feel again so soon: genuine relief, and the quiet beginning of hope for whatever came next. In the days that followed the trial, the pack settled slowly back into its usual rhythms, though the events surrounding Renwick and Soren's betrayal lingered in conversations throughout the estate for weeks afterward. A new councilman was appointed to fill the vacant seat, chosen this time through careful vetting that had not been applied so rigorously in years, a direct response to the realization that even trusted leadership could harbor hidden corruption if left unchecked. Noah returned to his position within the war room, though now he carried himself with a quiet confidence that had not been fully present before, the shadow of suspicion that once clung to him, entirely erased by the truth that had finally come to light. Guards who had once avoided his gaze now greeted him warmly, some even seeking him out specifically to apologize for doubting him during those difficult days. Ellie, too, found her standing within the pack transformed. Where whispers and suspicion had once followed her through the training grounds, she now found herself greeted with genuine respect, wolves approaching to thank her for the courage she had shown, both in her willingness to protect her brother and in her eventual honesty that had helped bring the true traitors to justice. She found Draven one evening near the edge of the training grounds, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of deep orange and gold. He turned as she approached, and something in his expression, usually so carefully composed, softened slightly at her presence. "I wanted to thank you properly," Ellie said, coming to stand beside him, not just for clearing Noah's name, but for believing there was more to the story than a simple confession, even when I gave you every reason not to trust me. "You gave me a confession riddled with holes," Draven said, though there was warmth beneath the words rather than accusation. "But you also gave me a demonstration of loyalty I have rarely witnessed in all my years leading this pack. That kind of devotion is not easily forgotten, nor easily dismissed as simple foolishness." "I nearly ruined everything with that lie," Ellie admitted. "If you hadn't questioned it, if you had simply accepted my confession as the council wished, Noah's name would still be shadowed by suspicion, and the real traitors would still be walking free among us." "But I did question it," Draven said. "And you, in turn, trusted me enough to help uncover the truth once I offered you the chance. That trust mattered, just as much as my own investigation. Neither of us could have exposed Renwick and Soren alone." Ellie considered this for a moment, watching the last light of the sunset fade slowly behind the mountains. "What happens now? For the pack, I mean, after everything that's happened?" "The pack heals," Draven said simply. "It always does, eventually, though scars from a betrayal this deep rarely fade completely. We will be more careful, moving forward, more thorough in how we vet those we trust with real authority. And perhaps," he added, glancing toward her with an expression that carried something warmer than simple gratitude, "the pack will also remember that loyalty and courage sometimes come from places we least expect." From wolves, who hold no formal rank or title, yet who prove themselves more trustworthy than those who do. Is that your way of saying you were wrong to suspect me at first? Ellie asked, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, for the first time in what felt like far too long. I suspected the confession, Draven corrected. Never entirely you. There was something in the way you stood before the entire council, terrified yet resolute, that told me the truth was more complicated than simple guilt. I simply needed proof to match what my instincts already suspected. Noah found them a short while later, having searched the training grounds specifically to share news that had just reached him from the war room. The rival pack that received the stolen plans has sent word, he said, slightly out of breath from hurrying across the grounds. They're requesting formal talks, hoping to avoid further conflict now that the truth of the theft has come to light. It seems Renwick and Soren's betrayal may have exposed weaknesses on their side as well, weaknesses they'd rather negotiate away than risk war over. Then perhaps some good may yet come from this entire ordeal, Draven said, beyond simply restoring your family's honor. A chance at peace, rather than the conflict Renwick and Soren's greed nearly caused instead. Noah nodded, relief and hope mingling clearly in his expression, as he looked between his sister and the Alpha King standing together at the edge of the training grounds. Thank you both, he said quietly, for everything. I don't think I'll ever be able to properly repay what either of you did to make sure the truth came out. You repaid it already, Draven said, the moment you agreed to risk your own safety helping to expose the very men who tried to destroy your family. That courage will not be forgotten within these walls, I promise you that. As Noah made his way back toward the war room, eager to share the news of the rival pack's request for talks with the other guards, Ellie remained standing beside Draven, at the edge of the training grounds, watching the final traces of sunset fade into the deepening blue of evening. What happens to us now? She asked quietly, uncertain exactly what she meant by the question, yet unwilling to take it back once it had left her mouth. Draven turned to face her fully, something steady and warm settling into his expression that had not been present during their earlier, more guarded conversations. I suppose that depends, he said, on whether you would be willing to remain close to this pack's leadership, not merely as a wolf who once stood accused, but as someone whose judgment and courage I have come to value a great deal these past several days. Ellie felt warmth rise to her cheeks, though she held his gaze steadily, rather than looking away. I think, she said slowly, that I would be willing to consider that, given the right invitation. Then perhaps, Draven said, the faintest hint of a smile finally breaking through his usually composed expression, I should extend one properly, rather than simply hinting at it beneath a fading sunset. As the stars began to emerge overhead, and the pack settled into a peace it had not known in many days, Ellie Marsh found herself standing beside the very king, who had once threatened to expose her false confession, now offering instead the beginning of something entirely unexpected. A bond, built not on suspicion, but on trust hard-won through fire, and loyalty that had proven, in the end, stronger than any lie told to protect it.